All right, so let's talk about word segmentation and how it relates to language learning and how it relates to combining one of my hobbies with one of my skills. So, word segmentation. Basically, if you look at this Wikipedia article, it's dividing a string or sentences into its component words. And the reason why it's so important is that in English, as this paper says, white space is usually like a strong indicator of word boundaries. But for example, in Vietnamese, that's not necessarily the case. Now, let's say you have a dictionary, that's great and all, but you still need to know what the actual word is so you can look it up. The problem when the word boundaries aren't clear is that you're not going to know which parts of the sentence you need to look up in a dictionary. So that's when you might want to use a word text segmentation library. So for example, I think this paper is from 2 years ago, and like they say, it is easy to use. Here's the GitHub for it. Um, Now, with this, I went ahead and created a prototype. So for example, if we take this text here and copy it, then here's the output. The premises is that if you highlight on a word, or I guess on some text, it'll tell you where the word starts and where it ends. And it can kind of recognize some names, but I also have a blacklist for like punctuation marks, just because of like the rendering engine that I used it. And the idea behind using a program like this is that let's say, okay, I finally understand the word for dent. Then I'm going to click it and I don't need to worry about it. If I see black, it means I should understand it. I should be able to understand numbers already. Um, and as I continue to read a document and mark it as read, then you can see that, words are commonly reused, or like very important, very frequent words are commonly reused, commonly found multiple times in the same paragraph. So that's why you see that getting black all over. So eventually, once you know a couple hundred words, when you start to read a new chapter, there's only going to be a couple new words in there. Um, Now, that might be an exaggeration. I think when I started to read this book and I only knew about 500 words, I needed to look up like every other word. But after about 1,300 words, I need to look up about like two or three per sentence. So at first it's a pain, but it gets better. So, and like, no pain, no gain. So the problem with a system like this, though, is that one, it's of limited use. You're not going to be able to recreate something with as much accuracy as actually just paying a native speaker to sit next to you or share screen with them and practice reading a book. And as soon as you don't really understand what you're reading, they're gonna be like, okay, so this word is actually together, and that's false. But like, let's see, so that you're gonna need someone to tell you like, okay, so these words are actually together, and they mean this. It is still better than nothing. It's still really useful. For example, something that I found really useful is Chinese text analyzer. So let's go ahead and take a look at this Wikipedia article um, for some part of a city in Naples. So here's the English article for it, and here's the Chinese article for it. Now, with Chinese, punctuation is kind of different. I'm not sure if even punctuation is the right word to refer to it by, but essentially all the characters are right next to each other. There's no white space. So I copy this into a text file, and then Chinese Text Analyzer lets you import text files or open them. All right, so I opened the text file in Chinese Text Analyzer, and you might notice that it's kind of similar to the UI for the prototype I made. That's because I found Chinese Text Analyzer first, loved it, and then started to adapt it into a prototype I was working on. So over here, you can shift and left click to look at a definition, and then it'll mark it as searched. So I actually do have that feature here where if you hold down left click, it'll open up a dictionary entry for it. So if we go here, let's say I already know this, whatever. At some point, you're going to encounter some word repetitions. All right. Now it does give you some nice statistics here. So with Chinese, there's something called like HSK, which is like uh, they're revamping it to be 9 levels, but right now it's 6 levels, with a exponentially increasing amounts of words per level. And these are supposed to be ones that are supposed to be like very useful for you to know. So if you're level 1, you're going to recognize 15% of these words. If you're up to level 2, then that's doubling the amount of words. You're going to understand a further 3%. So you're going to be able to recognize like 19% of the document. If you go all the way to level 6, that's going to get you up to almost 45%. And then 55% is not in the HSK word list right now. But 52% of these are just unique, they're not repetitions. So this works better when you can import a bigger document. Or if you're trying to consume native content, transcripts from like a TV show or something, if you downloaded something from like language learning with Netflix. But it does give you really like neat stats, and it allows you to import your word list from Anki, and it will automatically generate Anki cards for you to import based off of words that you don't know that are inside the current document. And that's a really powerful feature. However, word text segmentation has its limits, as you might have guessed. So this is a popular library for word text segmentation for Chinese. Now, can't remember if they actually use it here or not, but I know that it's commonly used in like if you once again, if you use like language learning with Netflix, if you look at the subtitles, they try to do the same thing. They're going to try to do word text segmentation to segment the transcript, and they're going to also try to like include like pinyin, like the pronunciation for it. And basically, if you're learning a language, you're going to need to do text segmentation in order to be able to look something up in the dictionary and learn the meaning. It's very crucial. But word text segmentation has its limits. So this is using like the best text segmentation library that's out there, but it still has its limits. Basically, the way word text segmentation systems are built is that they have to have training sets with annotations. And that takes a lot of time to build up. And the problem is that if some new slang occurs, it's not going to get added to the data set, immediately. It may take a long time until someone regenerates the model. Additionally, if you're watching a TV show with transcripts or you're reading a book, it's not going to support the names of the characters very well. It's not going to support those proper nouns. So I also just want to add that there's a huge disparity on how resources in academia are allocated as far as NLP research goes. A lot of research is conducted in either English or Chinese, and a lot of other languages are ignored. Now, it kind of makes sense because English is a very popular language, followed by Chinese, and it's a family of languages. But for example, if you're trying to learn a language like Vietnamese, it has the country has 93 million people in it, and it's kind of harder to learn Vietnamese than it is Chinese because of learning resources. It's a lot easier to learn English than it is to learn Vietnamese or like Spanish, just because there's a lot more resources out there for teaching people English, for teaching people Spanish, for teaching people Chinese. There's not as much demand from Vietnamese learners. So what happens is that because there's not enough people either interested in it or the funding isn't there to conduct research in these less popular languages, then the quality of the word text segmentation and like NLP libraries that are out there is not going to be as good, just because there's not as much resources. It doesn't mean that the researchers aren't as talented, there's just less resources. Like if there's any part that requires manual annotations, there's going to be less funding for getting people to actually go through like millions of documents, probably not millions, but thousands of documents. The funding isn't going to be there, or not to that extent. Additionally, one thing is that whenever people do create data sets with funding that they got for their project, then sometimes they'll release it so it's out there and anyone else can use it, which means that other researchers can then use that data set and they don't have to create their own. So they conduct more research in that language. And it kind of has this effect where that's just going to keep happening. And I think there was a post on Hacker News like last month about it. But essentially, it's kind of I totally forgot the word for it. There we go. And it's kind of like a feedback loop where there's more research that's been done in there. There's more people that can assist you or collaborate. And so you're kind of incentivized to keep working in that field. And if there's a lot more research being done there, then presumably there might be more grants available or funding. Maybe not. I'm not that far into academia yet. So a better solution would be if you were able to add new definitions somehow, but also view multiple definitions, because here, this is clearly evident here, this is marked as two different areas, which, yes, they're different words, but really they should be together, except this is a proper noun. It's not going to be in the data set most likely. So you need to be able to show the definition for individual components of another word that has its own definition. And you need to be able to add them dynamically. And I think that's the best solution for this. So what can you do? Well, I was thinking about this the other day, and I realized that maybe highlighting it like this isn't the best solution. I was originally thinking that if you could box the content in, that would kind of help, like add a span with a border. But that's kind of hard to do because you also want to preserve the original text formatting. So for example, if you add too many boxes, it's just going to get a little bit messed up. So I like the ability to preserve the formatting of the document because you also want this to be applicable for certain business uses or things like that. So the solution I came up with is just using underlines. And I found a really great Stack Overflow post when trying to pre-prototype this. So I knew that it was possible to arbitrarily add, underlines to text. Of course that's possible. Because if you look at Grammarly, they're able to do that. And they're able to do it with an extension. That's not really what I'm looking for. Extension support is too hard. But what I was really looking for is multiple overlapping underlines. So there's this segment of code here. All right, so I have this JS fiddle over here, and basically, of course, this is lorem ipsum, but you can see here that this might be its own word. And additionally, this whole phrase might be something like a quote from a popular book. So for example, if you weren't a native English speaker, you might not be aware of I am your father, Luke, I am your father. That's not an actual quote, but it's misquoted in a lot of media. So if you weren't familiar with Star Wars, which sadly a lot of people aren't, then you wouldn't really get the joke that they're trying to make. So one problem with word text segmentation engines is that they don't support slang for the most part. They don't support Urban Dictionary. The Urban Dictionary is a good source of cultural knowledge in case you're missing a reference. So we want to include that to some degree. So being able to add phrases to it would be really great. So this system could actually support that. So for example, this word might be its own definition. This whole sentence might be a popular quote by, and part of a political speech or something that's quoted a lot. And and this might be its own word here. So that's why it seems very important. I think you can change the color depending on the level. It's just CSS stuff, so you could do like, all right, yeah. So now as far as the interface goes, it's kind of really hard or impossible to make it so you can click on the underlines. I thought about it, and because originally I was thinking maybe we want to do some type of like canvas thing, but I think it's literally just better. I saw that there's a method for getting the selection, so I think we can add event handlers for like on touch down, on touch up. I'm not sure if on touch up exists. I know on touch exists, because I also want this to be able to support mobile, and I want things like obviously like on mouse down and on mouse up. So we can just copy the selection over and then query if it's actually in our like database or list of words, definitions, whatever. Additionally, a problem with my prototype is that right now, you know, they wanted to make it easy to run. They absolutely did. However, the best way to run it right now is to run it in a Python server that spins up the JVM. So that's not very accessible offline. I have to, you know, host it in my Docker Swarm, and I have to make API calls to it, so that I don't really care about the delay. But sometimes I've had a few flights since I created that prototype, and I really wish that I could have actually continued reading my book. However, and I could have like cached it somehow if I really wanted to, but I didn't want to touch it at the moment. So if we're able to instead load up the whole set of words into the browser, you know, I'm thinking like just like the set of words, definitions, the keys in like a key value stores of like, you know, like an actual dictionary, then that's probably only going to be a couple megabytes per language. So I don't think it's too bad to just at some point, you know, offer the option to download it into your browser, and that way we can support offline, or at least offline highlighting. It would be a lot more to download the definitions. And another idea I had was that we can make it so users can add their own, you know, obviously they can select parts of the text and save it as a unique wordlet. Yeah, okay, we can call it wordlets or whatever. And they can also add a definition to it. And then you can have some sort of reputation system where you can just vote a definition up or down. And I guess for a while before you actually get like a user base to report, you know, inappropriate definitions, as in like misleading, you know, obviously like if the word is like is of inappropriate nature, it wouldn't make sense to censor inappropriate definitions. But like if it's off topic, if it's not actually helpful, there can be like a report system. But for a small user base, I'm pretty sure you can just have the admin manually accept new definitions. And the great thing about doing something like this is that once you write the engine that's going to parse the text, preserve the structure of it, and just add underlines based off a key system, then you can support any language. You know, you could support, you know, like Chinese, you could support Japanese, you could support English, you know, like Spanish, German, whatever. It would be able to support everything. Unlike if you wanted to try to scale up this prototype here, you would run into the issue where you would need some sort of API for every single different language. I guess like the whole rendering thing is slightly the same and reusable across different languages, but it's just kind of bothersome to have a system where some languages are online only, and you know I think Java can run in the browser. So it's Python. I'm sure someone created like a JavaScript version of it. Um, Maybe not. All right. So there's a chance that you can't actually run it in JavaScript. I know some software exists where people can do Chinese text segmentation in JavaScript. Anyways, so that's the main idea. Basically, what we want to start doing is we want to create a prototype that's going to allow us to underline arbitrary segments of a text, and especially overlapping underlines. So I think that's the place to start, just to see how feasible it is. And then we can move on from there. But that's all. I think I really like the idea of wordlets. I'm gonna do like a domain lookup to see if that's taken or something. And that way we can have a landing site for the project. So that's all I have for now, and hopefully it doesn't take me too long to get to the next step.